10 of the strangest reasons why drivers have retired from F1 races. Electrical interference. The first Singapore Grand Prix was a very chaotic weekend. Mark Webber was going well and on course for a podium when the gearbox of his Red Bull RB4 tried to select 2 gears at once and he was out. That sounds fairly ordinary, but the reason for the failure came from some mysterious electronic interference, thought to have come from the area of the circuit around the Anderson Bridge. It affected some other drivers during that weekend, but Webber was the only one to suffer during the race. Confused suspension. The active suspension systems of the late 80s and early 90s helped F1 cars achieve some serious speeds, but they weren't foolproof, and the number of failures led to the systems being banned for the following season. This was perfectly illustrated during the 1993 Portuguese Grand Prix at Estoril, when Gerhard Berger's Ferrari F93 slammed into the wall following a pit stop. Initially, it looked like simple driver error, but it turns out that the bumpy surface confused the supposedly clever suspension system, and it forgot where it was on the circuit. This caused the car to bottom out, leaving Berger a passenger as he speared across the path of oncoming cars. Fuel rig. It's not the only refueling problem we've seen in F1, but it is one of the most bizarre. During a pit stop, Christian Albers decided that he wanted to get back in the race, so ignored his lollipop man and took off the moment his car had dropped off the jacks. Unfortunately, his car was still being topped up with fuel, and Albers ripped the hose right out of the refueling rig and carried on out of the pit lane. He brought his car to a stop and was out of the race. Spanner in the cockpit. When Johnny Herbert crashed out at the second Lesmo during the 1998 Italian Grand Prix, it was down to human error, but not the driver. It turns out that a forgetful Sauber mechanic had left a spanner in the cockpit. Eventually, it had worked its way under the pedals, and so when Herbert went for the brakes, the pedal couldn't move properly, sending him off the circuit and out of the race. Forgotten radiator bung. A mechanic leaving a spanner in the cockpit is one thing, but leaving an entire radiator bung in the side pod is quite another. Unfortunately for Jenson Button, that's exactly what happened at Monaco in 2010, and by the time McLaren had noticed, it was too late. Button's engine overheated behind the safety car, and he retired. Onboard camera. When Damon Hill took Michael Schumacher out at Monza in 1995, it set the stage for Ferrari to take a 1-2 on home ground. Jean Alesi was leading Gerhard Berger when one of the onboard cameras on Alesi's car flew off, and straight into his teammate. The camera smashed into the suspension of Berger's Ferrari, putting him out of the race instantly. Ferrari didn't even get to enjoy victory, as just a few laps from the end, a wheel bearing put Alesi out of the race as well. Talk about bad luck. Premature celebration. A race isn't over until you've crossed the finish line, and Nigel Mansell found this out in one of the worst ways possible at Montreal in 1991, when his Williams gave up with just a few corners to go. Mansell had dominated the race and led every lap, but at the hairpin on the last lap, his Williams ground to a halt. He'd already spent much of the last lap celebrating and waving to the crowd, but in doing so allowed the revs to drop so low that the car stalled. To make matters worse, it was his arch nemesis Nelson Piquet who inherited that what would be his last Formula 1 victory. Piquet didn't care about the lucky nature of the win though, saying he almost came when he saw Mansell stopped at the side of the track. Retired from a race he wasn't in. Hans Heyer didn't qualify for what would have been his only Grand Prix, but in some confusion at the start of the race, he slipped out of the pits and onto the grid, but no one noticed. In fact, it wasn't until his gearbox broke a few laps in that officials realised he shouldn't have been in the race at all, at which point he was disqualified, failing to finish a race he didn't qualify for and which he didn't officially start. Now that's quite the achievement. Crashed on purpose. Nelson Piquet Jr. joined the likes of Ayrton Senna and Michael Schumacher during the 2008 Singapore Grand Prix by crashing on purpose. Only unlike Senna and Schumacher, he didn't do it in a selfish attempt to win a championship. Oh no, he did it so that 1, the team wouldn't fire him at the end of the year, and 2, the ensuing safety car would put teammate Fernando Alonso on the perfect strategy, allowing him to win the race. Despite everything working out as planned, Piquet was dropped from the team halfway through 2009, at which point he came clean about the whole thing, and Crashgate became one of the biggest scandals in the history of the sport. Visor fluid mix-up. Okay, so this one is technically a did not start rather than a race retirement, but it's too funny not to include. In preparation for the 1975 United States Grand Prix at Watkins Glen, Jacques Lafitte went to apply some eye drops but picked up the wrong bottle. Instead of getting nice, soothing eye drops, he actually picked up his visor cleaning fluid and squirted it straight into his eyes. Unsurprisingly, the resulting burning sensation affected his vision so badly that he wasn't able to make the start of the race. 6 things that transform a supercar into a race car. To discover the differences between a supercar and a race car, we took a brand new Audi R8 V10 over to Spa in Belgium to put it through its paces. Aerodynamics. So this car